Founder of the global tech-free movement, the Opt-Out Family, Erin Loechner is a former social media influencer who walked away from millions of fans to live a low-tech lifestyle and is now teaching others how to do the same. Her cutting-edge work has been praised in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Huffington Post, and the Today Show. Erin, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So first of all, I love the term. So what does it mean to be an opt-out family?
The term really is just this idea of, I feel like as a default, technology is an opt-in thing, right? When we as a society opt in to something in tech initially, we kind of join this sort of conveyor belt of adapting to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And certainly our kids are not immune to that as well. And so I like the idea of at any time just sort of having the empowerment as a parent, as a person, as a child even, to say, I'm opting out of that. And to at any time pause, look around, see the fruits of what's happening as in our world, and say, I don't want a part of that. And so the idea is to pause and reassess and ask yourself, do I want to opt in or do I want to opt out? And also knowing that every time we opt into tech, we are opting out of some sort of our life, our brain, or agency. And so I wanted really to play on that recognition between the two thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's like the perfect little phrase in the way of putting it. One of the things I think about a lot is how this has become the status quo. You know, the fights at home about screen time, the decline of youth mental health, just kind of us all accepting that this is just the way it needs to be. And I just love the premise of, no, I don't need to participate in that if I don't want to. If you want to, that's your choice. Great. But I think a lot of parents feel like they can't, right? And so I love this like permission to say, you know what? Yes, I can. If I want to, I can opt out. So I love the way that you frame that. Okay, so according to Pew Research Center, 71% of parents believe children using smartphones might pose more harm than benefits, yet a majority of kids own a smartphone by age 11. So why do you think parents say yes to smartphones, even though they know it can be harmful?
I know. I think that statistic is just wild to me. There are so many reasons, right? And I think we probably know most of them. One is just that, again, it's the default. It is showing up in schools. It feels, I think a lot of times we marry the idea of tech with progress. And so we think, well, if we do say no to this one aspect, our kids will fall behind. Or we as a society will fall behind if we don't embrace this. And so I think that's a really big reason that we sometimes assume it's a necessary evil. And what is interesting to me about that thought is part of the premise for my book was really to find out, is that true? Is technology a necessary evil? Or is it just an evil that we choose to put a whole lot of weight on and call it necessary? And that isn't even to say that there isn't some good in it, because I feel like if it were all bad, no one would be using it. And yet I wanted to interview people in and out of Silicon Valley to find out, yes, we as consumers of tech think that this is a necessary evil, but what do the creators of tech say, right?
Yeah.
And it was just fascinating to find that no one in Silicon Valley believed that technology was as neutral as the consumer did. They were all very awake to the idea that you're really giving up a lot, when you're signing these terms and conditions. And we know that, I think, on kind of a visceral level. And we've seen it play out over time, but we always think it can't happen to us. We always think, well, our family, we follow the rules. We have the after 9 p.m. thing, and everybody docks their phones in the kitchen where you can all see it. And we just assume that none of these really crazy stories are going to happen to us. And if they do, and we talk to parents where they do, and so this is certainly not to fear anyone out of changing their ways, but I do believe that some of these harms are a lot more prevalent than we think that they are. And even if we follow all of the rules that every expert suggests, we are not immune to them.
Yeah. One thing you brought up, which comes up probably every time in my parent eds, which is this idea that tech means progress. And I always say I have a couple answers to that when people say, well, don't I need to give it so that they can understand how to use it, later in life? This is the way the world operates, is the argument. And I have a couple of things I say to that. And one of them is modern screen technology is so easy to operate now, even a baby can do it. So your kid will be able to pick it up quickly. Like that is not a worry. I'm Gen X. Like I grew up I'm old enough to have grown up without it, but young enough to have adapted very quickly. And when I started working professionally, tech didn't really work. It would shut down, like software would conflict. Like it really was something that you had to learn to troubleshoot, something that was frustrating, right? There was a lot of friction in it. Oh, it's so easy not only to use, like that's something that they've improved over time, but it just like kind of works. So I would argue that it is something that can absolutely be picked up very quickly at any time in a kid's life. And then the other thing you brought up that I think is super important is the people that design this stuff don't give it to their own kids. I mean, you and I both come from the tech industry. And so we're very comfortable with the notion of not giving it to our kids because we know too much. We've been under the hood, right? So those are a couple points that I always point out to people that ask that question, because you're right. Like it absolutely isn't something that is necessary to thrive. And in fact, many are arguing that and you know this, but tech people send their kids to like Waldorf schools, right? Which is like
Yeah.
no tech. Many argue that it's actually sometimes hinders the skills that we need for leadership, for entrepreneurial leadership, things like that. So I just wanted to like touch on those points because you brought them up and they're so important. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
add anything else to those topics.
Well, gosh, I remember touring our local zoo, and we were doing a volunteer program with she was then 5-year-old daughter. And I remember just hearing that the chimpanzees were using iPads, and that blew
Oh
the
my
whole
God.
argument out of the water for me when people would say, well, I
Yeah.
need them to know how to learn it for later and learn how to navigate
Yeah.
a relationship with it. And I thought, well, I get that kind of, and yet I'm not
Yeah.
convinced.
Yeah, that's so funny. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'd love to ask you about YouTube. So we always tell our parents, and they seem to be surprised by this, that YouTube is social media. I think people forget this, where they say no to social media, but are saying yes to YouTube from like a very young age. So it's 57% of parents with children age 2 or younger say their child watches YouTube. And that goes up to 81% by ages 3 or 4. So these are very, very young kids. So again, why do you think parents are saying yes to YouTube, even though it is social media?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's algorithm based, and so
Yeah.
for me, the algorithm is really what draws the line in terms of screen time for me.
Yeah.
I just don't participate in an algorithm at all. I think there are a few things. I think that anytime it's marketed as kid friendly or parental controls are kind of introduced, regardless of whether or not they work, we feel safer. And so I think the idea of YouTube Kids when they came out with their whole subscription content and everything was
Yeah.
a very powerful marketing strategy in terms of parents letting down their guard and recognizing, well, it's probably okay, even if they do watch the next video because it's YouTube Kids, right? It's going to be fine. I think the ones that assume social media is based on kind of forming relationships, we think of social media as something where you're going to friend me and I'm going to friend you. But that was kind of early social media. I mean, you remember
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
the algorithm changed in Instagram, it really was not heard of to be following Kardashians next to your next door neighbor. And that's not social media anymore. And
No.
now it is more media that is social based. So I think YouTube certainly falls within that category. But I think that parents assume if they're not chatting with people,
Yeah.
if they're not, regularly contributing to a back and forth conversation, that it maybe doesn't count. And I think a lot of parents too look at some of the kid influencers and, they hear the idea that I think a lot of, is it Miss Rachel? Is that her name?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. This name comes up quite often in conversation with
Yeah.
other parents. But the idea is, if I can't give my child as much sort of socio emotional learning as she can, shouldn't I give them the opportunity to have access to that?
Hmm.
And I can see that line of thinking. I don't agree that that's going to be beneficial to anyone in the long run. But I do understand certain parents that believe that Miss Rachel has educated and equipped and helped their child in such a way that it would be backwards to pull away from that. And so regardless of a social media status, whether it is or is not, I think they see enough benefits in the early stage. Now, I've never ever talked to a parent that does not experience kind of an uptick in that, right? Because once your child becomes familiar with an influencer and forms that parasocial relationship with the influencer, all bets are off. Now you're a barrier to a relationship. As a parent, you're the barrier to a relationship with another person that is educating your child. And that is kind of when things get a little bit slippery for parents.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up a good point, which is, and this is maybe one of the pros of social media to adults, which is that it has allowed people that might not have had a voice or a path to find success to find that. I mean, that is kind of a beautiful thing. And there have been some nice independent content creators of different types that where YouTube has like been a great place for them to get to people. So I think you're touching on something interesting there. I mean, I'll tell you why I say no to YouTube, and I'm going to continue to say no until at least age 16. For me, one of the out of all the platforms, YouTube is probably the most radicalizing out of all of them. And now I don't necessarily mean radicalizing like in the sense that your kid's going to become a terrorist, but the rabbit holes are very, very
Mm,
powerful in YouTube. So let's say it's something very benign, right? Like your kid is into, I don't know, Minecraft, right? And maybe they search one video for Minecraft, but obviously now that the algorithm knows that's what they like, they're going to feed them more and more of that until that's all they see. And my point is like, would my kid seek that out on his own had he not been fed that? Probably not, and it's probably going to make him more obsessed with that topic, good or bad, whatever it is, that is not agency is gone, right? Like it's not about what he's looking for anymore. It's about what the algorithm thinks is going to keep them online longer. So that's my biggest thing. Like I really, really think agency is important for kids. Our biggest thing is at Dopamine, we talk about, am I in control of the tech or is this tech in control of me? And to me, it's really hard to be in control of YouTube. Now, there are things you can do, which we do advise parents. Like if you are going to do it, if it's important to you, I mean, obviously co-viewing is great if you can. I know that most people, that's tricky. You can, if you do use it, definitely try to get the paid because then you take the ads out. And that's my other big issue is the ads. I do not want my kids to be advertised to. There's a little things you can do like turn off watch history. But the other big thing that really drives me crazy is the YouTube shorts because those are TikTok. I mean, people don't
yeah.
realize this, but you can get all the same stuff. It does all the same thing to your brain. And last time I checked, I don't know if they've changed something very recently, you cannot turn that off. So,
Right.
it's just too problematic. And we're not even touching on the safety, which is a whole nother bucket of area that we could talk about. But yeah, I mean, there's just too much there for it to be worth it, at least
Yeah.
for kids that are, younger.
You're exactly
So
right. I
yeah.
think, well, I interviewed a mother for this book whose son encountered a TikTok challenge, even though he was not allowed to be on TikTok
Yeah.
through YouTube,
Yeah.
assuming that it was YouTube Shorts. But it's all very insidious the way that, especially when these just massive companies get together and create these monopolies, it's very unclear how one platform informs the other and vice versa. And I don't know that we will ever be privy to that information. But I completely agree with you in that certainly when we think about brain development, when education is the science of relations, but someone else is making those relations for you and those connections on your behalf, that connection is no longer yours. So not only is it not part of your educational experience, but it's shaping and forming a different one entirely. And that is cause for alarm, I think, for developing brains. I think even adults still encounter this on a daily basis, probably more than any of them should.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's push a little bit about this concept of screen time. And I actually don't even like that term almost because to me, it's less about like the time you spend and more about what are you doing online. But in your work, I know that you talk a lot about this idea of opportunity cost, right? And this idea of what are you not doing. So Let's read a couple of these statistics. Children under age 14 on average are spending 3 hours and 18 minutes a day on tech. So that's nearly twice as long as in conversation with their families. So that's, I think, the most important piece of this. American teens spend 5 hours a day on average just on social media alone. So it goes up to 9 if you include other screen activities. So how do you think spending more time online and on devices than with our families impacts kids and teens?
Well, you become a family that where Instagram knows your child better than you do, you know?
Yeah.
I always bristle at the idea that, we're coming up on Christmas time, and I would hate the idea for an Instagram ad or a TikTok ad or whatever to better predict whether or not my child would like a toy than I could,
Yeah.
or a book or whatever it is. Just the idea of gift giving really puts it in perspective when you realize, I don't know what this person enjoys anymore. I don't know what they like. I don't know what makes them tick. I would love to be able to have these deep conversations, but they're so distracted and preoccupied by this screen that I can't get through anymore. And so I think we know that that doesn't happen overnight. I think it does happen very quickly once we hand them a device, but it happens in little increments. And so I think to me that the alarming thing is not as much the 3 hours a day, but it's the 3 hours lost in those just side conversations of being with each other in the same room at the same time and having ideas pop up and sharing experiences together, cooking together, whatever it is that you guys do as a family. But we really aren't able to form a family culture when everybody is experiencing individual cultures on their own devices. There's no
Yeah.
commonality to share anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key. I mean, the way I've been thinking about this a lot when it comes to screen time is there's no parent that is spending 3 hours a day with their kids. There's younger kids. There's no parent that's spending 5 hours a day with their teenagers. So just by virtue of time alone, kids are like increasingly being raised on the internet is like the best way I can describe it. And that's not to dig families or anything. It's just kind of like a function of time, and that's like one of the big reasons I delay is I want to raise my kids. I want to give them the morals and the ideas of, family that we've had for ever since, modern screen tech became what it was, right? Like that's the way it used to be. And I just see so much. I've been playing with this term called secondhand algorithm because my kids are not, online in the way that their friends are, but they're still bringing home those ideas, right?
Mm,
Whether it's like toxic masculinity ideas or body image ideas or skincare or whatever it is. And I think, when I see that, I know immediately that it's coming from the algorithm, because that's the type of stuff that gets pushed to these kids. But it can even be worse. I mean, I've seen things because I work, in schools that are terrible, racism, misogyny, I mean, anti-Semitism, you name it. And I mean, I think constantly these families are not racist. These families are not homophobic. These families don't have these ideas. So where are these kids getting them? Like there's only getting these ideas. There's only one answer to that. And we know that algorithms push that type of stuff to the top because it gets the most engagement. So yeah, I mean, to me, what you talk about is the time is important because yes, like we hope that we can spend more time and have more influence on our kids than the internet. Right. So that's where the
right.
time I think really matters. So I'd love to like push on that a little bit more because in your book, which is called The Opt Out Family, you're actually teaching families to experience more quality time, which is kind of what we're talking about just now. Create healthy habits, create lasting influence. Right. So can you give us like a few of your favorite tips from the book?
Yeah, of course. So the premise is just how can we as parents be more engaging than the algorithm? If we're
Yeah.
recognizing that whether or not they are encountering the algorithm firsthand, I love your concept of secondhand because it is just very much woven in the fabric of childhood today. But I wanted to know, okay, can parents even compete with that? Should they? And what was interesting to me in a lot of the research for this book was that so many of these big tech companies hire early childhood development experts as part of their onboarding to make
Hmm.
certain that any app that they're developing or any new platform that they're coming up with is going to be engaging to that sample set and is going to create long-term engagement.
Yeah.
So just looking at human development. And so I would never discount the basics. You know, TikTok wants your eyes. Well, we as parents can give our kids eye contact. We can sit down
Yeah.
with, we can listen in a way that the internet actually cannot, because the
Yeah.
internet is idea based, right? It's this isn't even going to scratch the surface of chatbots or anything, but we can offer them touch. We can offer them all of the senses that truly a phone or any sort of screen time can't compete with. And I think those are the things that immediately get lost when we hand over the phone, right? We're in a different room. We're not even in the same space as them anymore. And so they don't see our eyes, they don't feel our touch. We don't walk by and share some sort of moment together. So that's kind of why delaying, I believe, is deeply important, because of all those micro interactions that you're missing.
Hmm.
But in terms of ideas, you know, I also really strongly believe in the parents modeling of the behaviors. I
Yeah.
think that this is where the most science is anyway. And one tip that I have that we can all do literally right now is I I did this for my own phone before, when I still had a smartphone, but I changed my iPhone screen from this, just the startup wallpaper and also the background, from, you know, my family picture or the cute beach scene or the inspirational verse or whatever it is, to just black. I just made it a
Hmm.
black box, because it signaled to my brain that this is just a phone. It's not my phone. My whole
Yeah.
life doesn't exist on it. And it was really interesting when I interviewed some people at Apple, and they said, "Do you think that that was an accident, that we taught everybody how to personalize their phone right out of the gate? You know, we
Mm.
had you put your family photo front and center so that you really truly believed that when you tap that screen to see what time it was, and you've got that endorphin flow with your family's smiling back at you, you're making a connection with that device." And so immediately, as soon as I made it black, it just became something that sits on my kitchen counter, that can call the dentist, that can call grandma, you know, whatever needs to be done. And it was now suddenly the tool that worked for me rather than the other way around.
Hmm.
So that is something I highly recommend parents do. I hear a lot of parents change their phone to grayscale.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people, I love the idea of just dumbing down your phone completely. And there are a lot of apps that can do that. There's a lot of just going through the parent restrictions, putting those parental restrictions on your own phone is a great
Yeah.
idea, because it's very enlightening to see like how often you are reaching for that phone out of habit. You know, I
Yeah.
believe really deeply in the absence of multitasking. So I like the idea of having a single use item. So the phone calls people, whereas we have a desktop computer in the other room if I need to look up a
Yeah.
recipe or if I need to research something that I can't find in a book. So sort of modeling those ideas, asking a child who their first instinct might be to look it up online, asking, well, what's
Yeah.
another way? Who could we call that
Hmm.
might have this information? Who could we go visit? What could we see in person that would be part of an experience greater than just a quick Google search? So, those are a lot of the things we employ in our own home. My oldest is 13, my youngest is 5. So they've sort of grown up in this kind of environment. They just don't have the Google vocabulary that their friends do, nor do they care. I also really
Yeah.
believe in being the low tech fun zone. So have your kids, invite the kids, any kid is welcome in our home. We have an open door policy. And that way, you know, when our kids will come to us and say, we don't really have any friends, or everybody else at school has a phone, or they're all hanging out and texting each other without me, bring them all over and, you know,
Yeah.
do the thing where you put the phones in the cookie jar and then
Hmm.
have a bonfire and s'mores and play in the backyard and be that hangout zone, so that not only can your kids see how that works, but their friends are starving for it. Their friends want that time together in an area that they feel safe being kids, where they're not going to be filmed. They're not going to
Yeah.
be bullied, you know, they get to be kids again, and they want space for that. And so be that person that creates that space.
I love all of that. I feel like you just taught our parent ed because we have a lot of these same ideas, but your specifics are great. Like I never thought about, I have my family photo on mine. I never thought about that idea that would I feel differently if it wasn't there? But modeling is huge. We talk a lot about it. I love that you're giving practical tips and kind of this idea that, hey, like I'm fallible too. Like if I don't put controls on my own phone, yeah, it's going to be hard for me to put it down as well. So for me, I took Instagram off my phone years ago. I just felt it making me feel bad about myself. And for me, it was more about watching other moms, and kind of what they were doing. Or maybe it was the mom night that I wasn't invited to, or the play date that my daughter wasn't invited to. And I just like realized, and I'm in the industry, like I understand how this stuff works, but I just kind of realized like, hey, this is not good for me. So what I ended up doing, and we call it self-binding, right? And you described a couple of examples of that too, which is where we need help. Like we need a physical barrier between ourselves and our phones. So what I did, so I still need it for work. I took it off of my phone and now I have it on a work iPad that gets locked away at the end of the day. So that was super helpful and enough for me. I know some people need more because I've often heard of people like just reinstalling it, right? Like that block works for me. But it just really depends on your own brain and kind of your own body. So I was going to bring up, I love the idea of this making your phone more boring. So you brought up grayscale, you brought up making the screen black. Like anything you can do to remove things that are distracting or don't need is super, super helpful. I did not know about this app until recently, but have you heard of Opal? They're the number one screen time management
Yeah.
app. So Dopamine, we're working with them now where they provide the implementation and we provide the education for high schools. But it's basically a better version of Apple screen time, which is so easily overridden. And you can just say like, give me more time, no problem. So it kind of gamifies it. And since it's kind of like Duolingo where you can get streaks and it makes it very annoying. Like you can get
Yeah.
on Instagram, but it'll make you wait and it'll make you negotiate. And by the time you've done all that, you're like, do I really need to be on there? No. So since I got that app, I have been able to bring my phone with me again because it is very effective at blocking the things that are distracting me. Where for a while I was using the light phone because I just got tired of it, even though I was just doing email, really. I'm like, why? I don't need to be checking email when I'm with my kids. But I found it hard to focus. So love all your ideas. I wanted to add the idea of Opal because to me, I've been thinking a lot about this. I think as parents, it's almost like on the airplane where they say like you put on your mask first, your oxygen mask before you help your kids. Like I'm kind of thinking of this more in that sense of like, hey, we need help too. And so not only are you helping yourself, but you're modeling to your kids. So I know I just threw a lot out there, but I love all those ideas that you gave.
Me too. Me too. And I love too that when you encounter that friction in your own life of and for me personally, it came from just carrying around a dumb phone and not being able to. When I was at the diner, I couldn't see the menu because it was a QR code. And so,
Yeah.
your kids get to walk through that with you and they get to
Yes.
recognize that you can still be a vibrant person and have this rich social life and walk around the world and not be tethered to any device at all. You cannot even have a phone if you don't want a phone.
Sure.
And I loved my kids being able to watch me, just go up to the diner and say like, hey, do you have a paper menu? And it's never a big deal. They do,
No.
they still have a paper menu. They just don't use them.
Yeah.
So, I like all of those friction points for the parents that when the kid is still under your own roof and in your own care, they can see that and they can kind of point to somebody else. I never want the reason that my child buys his or own smartphone to be because they don't know anybody else that doesn't have it. They don't know another way. And
Right.
so for me as a parent, it was important that I could show them that way and be that person to sort of walk them through it.
Yeah. And I think there's something about what you just said too, because I hear all the time from parents, and this is a complaint where like, they're like, I hate my phone, but I need it to get into my bank account. I need it to get on a plane, whatever. And I get that, because when I was using the light phone for a while, I'd run into things like that occasionally where I was like, whoopsie, I didn't think ahead. But thinking ahead is so important. And that is another skill that our kids are missing when you walk out the door with the supercomputer in your pocket. Yeah, like, you don't have to think about what you're doing. When I'd leave the house with just the light phone, I was very mindful. Okay, I'm not getting on a plane. I don't need a boarding pass. Like you really kind of start to think that through and talk it through with your kids. And that's another thing that I talk about a lot with for a reason that I delay is, I mean, I think it's really important to make a plan in the morning with your kids. I get the convenience of being tethered to them, but you're teaching them great skills for the future. And I thought about that when you talked about like the menu in the diner. There's always a workaround, right? You
Yeah.
just have to think ahead a little bit and do a tiny bit more work. And I think we've all gotten used to the frictionless way the world is, but it's actually good for us. It's good for all of us. So
It's
That's a
so
really,
good
really
for
good
us.
point. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And then not to spend too much time on this, but two more things that you said that we recommend as well. We call it segmented tech, but it's actually a trend and you identified it, which is going back to this idea of different tools for different things. So that's the way it used to be. We used to have a phone. We used to have a, calendar. We used to have like all of our tech was separate, even when tech was introduced, right? And then it all merged into one. But the trend is going back. I don't know if you've noticed that in your own travels. And we recommend, like in our house, we have, it's called the Skylight calendar. So you can sync it to your phone, but it's just a calendar that sits on your kitchen, doesn't do anything else. So that's a great one. I mean, they always say get an alarm clock. Again, that's something we've just delegated to our phones, but it makes a huge difference for sleep. Ebook readers are coming back. Books is, I think, doing very, very well. So again, it's kind of going backwards a little bit, maybe, but I think it's something that people are longing for.
Yeah.
And one more thing. I love the phone box or the phone, you called it a cookie jar. So there's so many ways you can do that. We do that too in our house. We use a phone box. And there is a psychology behind if it's there, you're going to use it. So that bit of separation, the kind of out of sight, out of mind, and kind of we're all doing this, we're all in on this. It's a house rule. I say it's like leaving your shoes at the door. I love
Yeah.
it. And parents are afraid. And I'm like, no, it's like you said, the kids actually like it. My son had a sleepover for his 12th birthday. And I said to the moms, I gave them like, we're doing this, we're doing this. And I said, by the way, I'm going to take the phones at whatever it was, 6 o'clock. They're going to go into a phone box. So if you need to reach them, you can text me, I'll keep my phone close. And 100% of them either said like, great, thank you for doing that. I won't even send the device. Like you'd be really surprised how receptive other parents are to these ideas. So yeah, I just wanted to I guess, highlight those a little bit more because they're such good ideas. And I think parents are either afraid or maybe think it's not possible, but it is. And it makes a huge, huge difference.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. I think sometimes you just have to go first and the other parents will thank you. I think about it a lot with clubs and sports and that kind of a lot of sort of that middle school to high school range when their world becomes a lot more centered on their peer group and
Yeah.
whatever club or sports they're in. A lot of those coaches and team leaders are communicating via sometimes social media, but mostly just even texting or some sort of app that has a scheduled calendar. And a lot of parents say, well, I need to get them a phone so that they can keep up with all of that. And most people haven't ever even talked to the coach about it. Well, is there an alternative way? My child has a desktop computer and an email address. So is there a way that you can add him to any sort of system? Or even better, can I raise my hand to put together some sort of team mailing list so that we can send it out via email? And then those kids that only have access to desktop would be able to have that in it. Any changes of plans, I'll do a phone tree. I mean, it's not like we didn't do this in the 80s. And so if you're the parent that can raise their hand and say, can we sort of rejigger this in a way that will suit everybody? I can't even tell you how many other parents will kind of come out of the woodwork and say, thank you. I was wishing for the
Yeah.
same and I was right there with you. And I thought I was going to have to get him a phone and I didn't want to yet. It just sort of, it builds community along the way. You build fellow advocates and then everybody's working together for something better for all of their kids.
Yeah. I mean, I think that goes back to the status quo, right? We've all kind of bought off on this. I wonder a lot like why it's easy for me. I mean, it's not easy to delay it and all that, but why I don't mind pushing back. And I think I've just always kind of been a rebel and I've always kind of been like a questioner of the status quo. So I'm the one that always does this. I'm the one that says like, hey, at camp, I'm not super comfortable with them, having phones during the day. And often they'll say, oh my gosh, you're right. Like they're not socializing, thanks. And they'll say something, and not to like ruin it for anybody else, but back to your idea of like accommodating everyone, it does become kind of a fairness issue because these things do affect each other, right? Like something your kid might have access to, well, they can show my kid that thing very, very easily, right? So that's like the content harm piece. But back to your point about like things becoming status quo, like with the sports and everything, like, yeah, I think even the coaches and the people that run this have bought off on it and they've maybe never heard somebody offer an alternative or ask for an alternative. So I think, to your point, more people would be on board if, even if the parents that have given social media, they probably don't want their kids to spend as much time on it, right? So I think like there's something there for everyone. And I always just say, often it's the tone in which you say it, right? Like not being judgmental of other people's choices. And often I always advise, like, kind of put it on yourself. Like, we have like this whole screen etiquette conversation starters that we give to parents. And I do it all the time and I never get a bad reaction. So an example would be like, hey, maybe it's a first play date. We're coming over, just so you know, we don't do social media in our house. Like, is that okay? And they're almost always say, oh my gosh, no problem. Or we can keep the iPads put away or whatever. Like, I've never had a parent be unreceptive. And this is the thing that parents, I think, are most afraid of. And so they'll text me or ask me like, what do I do? And I'm just like, just be honest. And you can even put it on yourself and say, this is what we do. Is this okay with you? And it
Yeah.
works. I've never heard it not working.
Yeah,
So
I completely agree with you.
yeah. Okay. So I do want to ask you about the concept of influencers, because you talk a lot about your past as a influencer. So the statistic is 57% of American Gen Zers want to be influencers. So it's like the leading career choice. And if you compare it to China, 56% of Chinese children want to become astronauts. So why is this? And is becoming an influencer a healthy career for our kids to aspire to? Maybe talk about your story a little bit as part of it.
Yeah. Well, I had never read that statistic until you shared that with me. That's wild. I am always super leery of ever telling anybody else how to live their life. I think there are a million ways to live a beautiful life. So I don't know. I can't judge whether or not influencing is a healthy career choice for anyone at all. I wouldn't put a child in that category. I think just because it's kind of the same as child actors, and we don't
Yeah.
know very many that turned out very well. But for me, what was very difficult about influencing, it's your entire life. And I think there are some people that influence in certain, maybe you have a very produced influencer persona and you do that in work time and then you're a different person outside of that work. I found that because my initial job, I was HGTV.com influencer. So I had a renovation show with my husband and we talked about design. And then at the same time that I got pregnant, and we found, of course, views spike when you bring a baby into the mix. And then
Yeah.
everything is, then it's okay, well, how are you going to blend, your love for design with building a home for your family and everything else? And so it just kind of skyrockets. And for me, it became, I felt like a fragmented person. I felt like someone who could speak on this topic, but not this topic. I felt as if I really wanted to protect my kids in that part of life that's very sacred to me, which is any private part of life. They didn't sign up for this, so I didn't feel like I ever wanted the camera on them. I felt as if, I think that if you're a grown influencer, I think there's a way, specifically in the parenting space, there's a way to talk about parenting without talking about parenting your child. And
Yeah.
that's kind of always the direction that I wanted, if I needed to talk in the parenting space, to go. Honestly, it became increasingly hard just with the sheer amount of information that's available on everyone. I found it was not an odd thing to have somebody recognize me on a street or at an airport or at a conference and ask about the kids. And we didn't share their names. We didn't share their faces. We were very private and very mindful about all of that. And yet things kind of spill in. So I think for me, influencing was not going to be a logical course, given sort of my desire to let them have their own life that is completely separate from what I do for a living. But then honestly, I think because I had done it for so long, so I was an influencer for almost 20 years. That's a
Wow.
long time.
Yeah.
So I remembered the early internet, just like you did. I remember the evolution of sort of everything that we've ever talked about online. And it just became sort of a race to the most, what we called authentic person, but what really should be called transparent person.
Yeah.
Whoever shared the most won the game.
Yeah.
And I could see how that would be very tempting to do. and to start making life choices based on what would perform well. And I know many influencers who did this, based on, well, golden doodles are trending. So we're going to have to get a golden doodle now, regardless of whether or not we're going to rehome it in 7 months because it's not trending anymore. Now it's dachshunds. There
Yeah.
were influencers I know and still are that live life that way. And I never believed that you have to live life that way to be successful. But it did kind of raise a lot of questions. Well, what am I doing this for? What's the purpose? If this was all accidental success, do I even want it anymore? If I have to kind of rejigger my personality into fitting what's palatable to the masses. And it's really it's a very interesting thing to process. I think both for the creator and for the consumer. If anybody has any kind of parasocial relationship with an influencer or someone that they really look up to but have never met in person, you don't have the context for their life. You don't actually know what their life is like. To me, to put out any sort of content that would make my life more appealing than someone else's felt like a lie, because it felt like if I'm not sharing the context in this, then you're getting the wrong idea. But if I do share the context in this, I'm sharing too much, because this is also a life that's worth preserving.
Yeah.
It was a very tricky space to live in. And I do believe that people can use their influence for good. I personally believe that was not a path for me
Hmm.
and my family.
Yeah. That's thank you for sharing that. I never thought about this concept. I think you were kind of speaking to like maybe oversharing, or the more you share, maybe the more engagement you get. What it made me think of, and tell me if you agree with this, but no matter what you share, right? Whether you're an influencer or an ordinary person, if you're bearing your soul, if you're putting it out there on the table, if you're really being yourself, and then let's say you don't get the likes, let's say you don't get that feedback, don't you think that's pretty hard? Like whether you're doing that professionally or just like as a normal kid. What do you think about that idea?
Oh, I think for kids it would be crushing. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's every child's fear in the back of their head is, am I not enough for this world, or am I too much for
Yeah.
this world? And then there it
Yeah.
is in black
In
and white,
numbers,
that
in
validation
numerical.
of
Yeah,
that fear.
exactly.
I would hate that for a child.
Yeah. And then, I brought up the statistics of the Chinese children. And this is, this is just like reportedly, but apparently, like with TikTok specifically, they are much more locked down with what they do with their kids and social media. But from what has been reported, their kids on TikTok are recommended STEM content, right? Where our kids are kind of recommended the worst of the worst. And I guess it kind of goes back to this concept of like algorithms matter. And yes, the influencer stuff is going to get pushed to the top because it gets, a lot of engagement and things like that, right? Otherwise, you have to pay to play. And I know that because of what I do, where when we first started out, circling back to what you said about the beginning of social media and how it was about connecting with friends, it's not even about that anymore. It's about who pays to get their stuff pushed up, or if you're an influencer, how you can hack the algorithm, right? Whether it's by sharing a lot or saying something very outrageous or whatever to get to the top. So our kids are going to be seeing a lot of that content, and therefore maybe be inspired to do it themselves. And we could bring them this concept of wealth porn, which I think is huge. Like that is definitely a problem in America, more so than in other countries, right? Where they're seeing people living their best lives, going on amazing vacations, talking about all the things they acquired, right? And I think all this stuff is connected. But again, back to the algorithms matter. What our kids are getting is very different than maybe what kids are getting elsewhere, especially when with places that are regulated. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I remember being on a trip and we were in Singapore. And I mean, obviously you can't access certain sites there. Everything is just much more regulated and locked down. And so it was very interesting to see what was accessible there versus here.
Yeah.
What had we been trained to deem acceptable as a society that they would never ever publish or air or any of the sort.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, we're a different system. Like I get it. We are what we are. But, and I agree with you, like there is a lot of good, and it is a valid career. I work with influencers constantly, and it's hard, to be able to make content, to be able to just understand the system of marketing and all of that. It is definitely a career. It's just like with many of these things, it's very thin air. And it is a very challenging one for all the reasons that you talked about. And I would add to that, you kind of have to be online a lot, right? In that
Yeah.
career. I mean, that's that in itself, back to the time we spend and our influences and everything of ourselves is challenging. So I guess I agree with you that yes, of course it's valid. Yes, of course, there's a lot of good, but I just think for, especially for young people, it's a very, very challenging career for like their mental health, frankly.
Oh gosh, yes, absolutely. I think it's a challenging career for anyone's mental health, but to have a child in that arena
Yeah.
feels far too much too soon. That's something I would never wish upon any child.
Yeah, I know. Well, Erin, thank you so much for your time. We have so much in common with kind of being in the industry and choosing this path for our kids. And I just love your notion of kind of giving permission to people to do this. And your tips are just so doable and approachable and down to earth. And the tone in which you're delivering them is so spot on. I feel like any family can take these manageable steps, right? To kind of regain their family, right? And I just love that
Yeah.
you're empowering families to do this. So thank you for your time. It was really great talking with you.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me.